Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Kohler, and thank you for joining us today for AirSage's first Brewing Data. Today we have Guy Rousseau joining us from Atlanta Regional Commission. My name is Robert Kohler, and I'll be your host for the day. My background is 20 years of experience in transport. Hey, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us with the Brewing Data series. Again, my name is Robert Kohler, joining you from AirSage. And with me today, I have Guy Rousseau from Atlanta Regional Commission. Guy is the Transportation Models and Travel Surveys Manager for ARC, which he joined in 1998. He's responsible for model development activities and travel surveys. Before joining ARC, he was a principal traffic engineer for the City of Atlanta Department of Public Works and was responsible for travel demand modeling and simulations. He was also a transportation modeler for MPOs in Dayton, Ohio, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. He's a committee member on various TRB committees and NCHRP projects, also the chair of SHRP 2 C10A, project on advanced travel demand modeling, and fine-grained time-sensitive networks. Additionally, he's a committee member of the NAS and TRB synthesis study on the determination of the state of practice in transportation travel forecasting, Special Report 228, as well as the AASHTO CTPP Oversight Board. He's participated in model peer reviews of metropolitan planning organizations for several MPOs and DOTs. Guy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our very informal chit-chat conversation.
Absolutely. So, with COVID and all the things going on in life right now, we've seen a lot of changes in transit. Transit networks are evolving. Unfortunately, funding issues, decreases in ridership, changes in travel patterns, all of these things kind of create a perfect storm for uncertainties of MARTA, Metro, MTA, whatever acronym we want to have in any city nationwide. What changes do you think are needed to make it easier to increase efficiency in transit networks, both in Georgia and nationwide?
So that's a great question. It's going to take me a while to answer, but here we go. So as far as transit network coding per se, I would say let's start with that first and foremost. So the nature of transit network coding has evolved and changed over time. So now there's a greater emphasis placed upon GTFS. So we're all familiar with GTFS, so we all need to make sure that our networks are built upon GTFS networks, which is available from our transit agencies locally in the Atlanta region with the MARTA, everywhere else is in, but also our other smaller transit providers as well. It's basically times and schedules and then routing. So it's everything that we need to do a better job as far as transit network coding. So we're happy to say we've reached that point. We're accounting for GTFS. In addition to that, probably the bigger issues are obviously funding related. Funding is always an issue, it seems, in the world of transportation planning in general, whether it's for investment on roadways, but transit especially in this case. But I would add there are other newer or more recent challenges associated with transit, but I would say with transportation in general. So climate change is a big one. We all, as we do our daily commutes to work, we all carry our carbon footprint and we drag it into the office. So that obviously presents a challenge by itself. So we need to do a better job as far as your carbon footprint and climate change in general. So that being said, our planning efforts need to account for this and find measures and policies that are aimed at, I would say, towards a net zero carbon reduction emissions. Obviously, that's going to be challenging, but definitely heading towards a downward trajectory as far as carbon footprint is concerned. I would also add equity in transit systems, equity in roadway improvements. Equity is the big buzzword nowadays, rightfully so, in the sense of being more inclusive of groups and minorities and such as we plan for transit projects, expansions, roadway widenings, that sort of things. But back to transit by itself is facing a challenge especially more so now as a result of the pandemic. But this started, I would say, around 2017, 2018. Right before the pandemic, we had noticed a decrease in transit ridership. So much so that one of my favorite statistics that I like to tell everyone is that on any given day, work day of a Monday through Friday, let's say, when you look at workers, there are more workers working from home than are workers riding transit to go to a workplace. So this is huge because back in the days, going as far back as the 80s, 90s, even early 2000, 2010, 2015, there were more workers riding transit to go to a workplace because work from home was fairly very small, a minority. Technology was in there, but now technology has gotten better broadband and such. So we have better abilities to telecommute and work from home. Now, that being said, this has gotten even more amplified with the pandemic. So, if nothing else, the pandemic has taught us that yes, we can work from home, we can be productive with whether it's through these Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all these collaborative efforts to meet on a daily basis with our staff. We can run models at ARC Planet 24/7, literally, and remain productive. Even I would say more productive with fewer disruptions and such at the workplace compared to your home office. So that being said, policy decision, do we need to invest more in transit or broadband expansion, for instance? Well, I think there's a neutral bit of both. We need transit for underserved populations. Now, it's easy to say, white collars can work from home, telecommute, that's fine, but not everybody can do that. So there's still a need for transit, but even transit service provisions are changing and evolving over time as well. Now, it's more along the lines of micro mobility solutions and then on-demand type of transit services. So perhaps smaller transit vehicle buses, perhaps modify those schedules and timelines, be more on an on-demand basis and share the transit ride with neighbors and that sort of thing. So that is absolutely changing and evolving. So a long answer to your question, Robert, as far as transit, it's definitely changing over time. So we keeping track of it.
No, that's great to hear. And that's the thing, if we're not planning for the future, we can't get anywhere. So the whole carbon footprint, we're looking to decrease, but overnight, it's not going to be zero. But these ways your team are coming up with ideas internally and the outreach that ARC is doing is incredible to help guide and actually get us there. So, with that said, do you guys typically work with big data to look at either determining enhancing transit plans, roadway plans? What type of data does your team and your consulting team leverage typically?
Yes, so big data, obviously, that's also been evolving over time. It's becoming more prevalent. It's also more accurate, I would say. And so that being said, there's always a need, even more so nowadays, for big data sets, origin, destination, travel patterns provided by, we all have one of those cell phones, right? Smartphones. So via GPS locations. Now, back in the days, it was all based on cell phone tower triangulation, which was okay at the time, but now it's all highly more accurate, GPS driven and all that. So big data is definitely answering a need for travel and modeling analysis. Reason is that the public is very, very aware and familiar with smartphones. Everybody's got a smartphone. They know passively their data is being captured in terms of travel patterns, travel behavior, origin, destination. So we get the question, I oftentimes question the public, so you know about, your cell phone is collecting. Say, yes, we sure know. As a matter of fact, we leverage that, what we call, quote unquote, big data. So that being said, these data needs are evolving. Now, back in the days, it was all based on, I would say, household travel surveys, the good old fashioned way, which I believe in the future into a hybrid approach, ways to leverage big data as provided by AirSage and other data providers or data aggregators, but in combination with a traditional household travel survey. Now, clearly, the sample sizes are different. Traditionally, with a traditional type of household travel survey, I've been getting 1 out of 200 households, which is never enough, right? We never get enough data, but statistically speaking, It's good enough as far as collecting, socioeconomic profile, demographics, income level data, that sort of things from a traditional survey. Now, the beauty, the appeal, the advantage of big data is the greater sample size. It's probably up in the 20, 30%, perhaps even more, capturing origin destination patterns. So we know a lot about the home place and the workplace with big data. So we get these trajectories from home to work. And we can supplement those with a traditional survey that will collect additional socioeconomic profile data, income, auto ownership, that sort of things. So this is the wave of the future, in my opinion, is a hybrid approach, but definitely focus on big data because it's well known out there and it's getting better and better. The accuracy is definitely there. So over time, I think that's only going to get better. And then, so we definitely have to acknowledge that aspect. And I think for the most part, as travel demand modelers, we do acknowledge the existence and we leverage that data. We've had great projects in the Atlantic region with that type of data, including AirSage data for external stations. So we're very familiar with it and we're getting even better with it. And the large data sets are no longer an issue. Again, back in the days, your data set's too large, well, that's complicated. But now, memory and computer systems and servers is, we can throw more memory at a server, and that's fine. We can handle large data sets with our studio and other tools to better manipulate and make sense of the data. So yes, so that, again, long answer to your question, but yeah, clearly there is a need for big data in our community.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, I'm well familiar with ARC's activity-based model. You guys leverage a whole bunch of cores to conduct runs on your regional model. I mean, it's insane if you look at where things were even 10 years ago, the strides forward your team has taken. And it's really now becoming more of the norm nationwide. We're getting into activity-based modeling to get a better sense of what is going on rather than just a 4-step model of, okay, this is good enough. You guys have gone way beyond and are doing that.
Yes, that's correct. So that's another good point as far as the evolution of travel demand modeling over time. Again, back in the days, like you said, Robert, a 4-step trip-based, very aggregate model was probably good enough. The reason is because back in the days, life was more simple. Home-based work trips, home-based other, and non-home-based trips. That was pretty much it. And the ones we knew the most about were the home-based work trips via travel surveys. For the most part, essentially, there was no big data available back then. Now, life has evolved. Life is becoming more and more complex, more variety of activities throughout the day. So we made that transition to activity-based models, it's over a decade ago, because of the complexities of life in general. It's no longer driven by trips, home-based work trips, and now there's a lot of trip chaining that takes place in between your home and your work and coming back from work. So much so that we figured, well, activity-based models are more appropriate because we will look at the type of activities you conduct throughout the day. So you can, you obviously have a work activity, but there's shopping involved, eating out. You have, if you have children, you drop them off to school, to daycare, then you pick them up, then you run errands, you go to the post office, and so on and so forth. So it is all derived from the types of activities we conduct throughout the day. And with that, we do trip chaining and integrate it in such a way that we're better able to account for VMT, vehicle miles of travel, that we all do throughout the day. And that's what basically is coming out of travel demand model to a future forecast of travel demand and basically traffic volume. So where do we need roadway improvements? Where do we need additional transit investment? This is all very much not the data-driven approach, like anything else in life is data-driven, it seems. And but definitely with travel demand modeling, this has evolved. So now with activity-based model, we have now a new platform called ActivitySim, and ActivitySim is a consortium of MPOs. We started that was many years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, 3 MPOs at ARC Atlanta, and then the Bay Area of MTC, and then Sandag in San Diego. Ever since the family has grown, so ActivitySim is the platform of choice, I would say, for large NPOs. We even have some state DOTs. And essentially what it is, it's basically taking previous versions of activity-based models, have this consolidated approach, and oh, by the way, we're getting away from Java, now it's all in Python, which is more transparent, easier to read, to follow, and so on and so forth. So that, in a nutshell, is the history or the evolution of trial demand modeling at ARC, but in general throughout the US. And I will say ActivitySim is also now in Australia, and Dubai is apparently up next to it. So it's definitely all over.
So you find that the days of punch cards are no longer for a travel demand model?
That's correct. Not only that, but Fortran. Well, remember, Fortran programs back in the days were very effective, very quick. They did the job at the time. Like anything else that evolved. So we went from Fortran programs to Java. Java was okay for a while. Now it's all Python, and who knows what the next language is going to be. But for now, this is the way to go. Yes.
Yeah. And, this is kind of a good segue into what I really am passionate about is land use patterns, how people interact with it. The goal in an ideal utopia would be a lot of mixed use, transit-oriented development. So there's clearly a strong correlation between travel time and distance and getting to the urban form or land use for any metro region. It's something that our planners want to plan for. It's something that the developers want to tie into. However, sometimes there's some pushback that, we get when we're trying to get to that ideal land development, transportation network dynamic. But the pandemic and new opportunities for employment pretty much nationwide now have changed urban transit ridership, especially in Atlanta. So what types of land use changes do you envision for the future? I know a lot of people have that opportunity to go to a quote unquote hoteling working station. So what we now see is people working remotely from home, working at hotels, and also working at the main corporate office on occasion. What do you see moving forward?
Yes, so that's right. As far as land use concerned, we do have land use models at ARC, and then, but as far as land use patterns per se, like you said earlier, Robert, definitely TODs, transit-oriented developments, are still very prevalent and very valid options. And the goal here is to have these TODs concentrated near workplaces, but also where people live. So where people live and work, so that ultimately at the end of the day is try to remove that drive to work or that drive to shopping opportunities or that drive to the restaurant when you go eat out. So those TODs provide these opportunities for basically being able to do most of your daily activities, walking, transit, riding your bike, and then you take your car only if you really truly need to go somewhere far. So clearly, in the Atlanta region and elsewhere, I'm pretty sure there's still a need for transit-oriented development. Now, the workplace is also evolving and changing, like the hoteling example, Robert, you mentioned. And that's something I would say we need to get more data on that as far as that's concerned. It has evolved and changed very quickly with the pandemic, even more so. But there's a need to, I think, capture more data, whether it's via surveys or big data. I always look forward to big data to assist us with, whether it's equity analysis, TOD analysis, this hoteling of the workplace, so we can get a feel for where are people actually going to work in relationship to where they live, and if it's one of those hoteling area where there's, whether it's called WeWork or any of those companies where there are opportunities for companies to share space, share office space. That is definitely there. And of course, you got to work from home to keep in mind. So there's so much change, so much dynamics. This is very unique time to do transportation plans, which is something we're about to do at ARC's update our transportation plan to the future. So we need to be very mindful and considerate of all these options that are constantly changing and evolving over time, including in the land use patterns. That is for sure definitely changing. So
yeah. And I think one of the interesting land use patterns, transportation network changes we saw during the height of the pandemic was streeteries, closures of roadways to be more festival oriented, whether that lingers around and continues into the future, and have we determined, such as years ago with the closure of Broadway in Midtown Manhattan in segment, what do you think the long-term viability of people reevaluating the need for every single node and street length in a transportation system? Where do you see that going?
Oh, that is definitely there. I think we've demonstrated, and again, thanks to the pandemic, unfortunately, but later there was a need for these, street level types of activities or opportunities. So to be more walking and pedestrian friendly, bike ped friendly, but especially walk friendly. And then we had an example in downtown Atlanta, Peachtree Street, which they've done that exactly during the pandemic. But unfortunately, now they're back to, but it was prior to the pandemic as far as, travel lanes. So, and then there was more space in the curb lane was basically reserved for additional pedestrian activities, but that's been now it's back to what it was before. But I think there's a need, and there's other examples elsewhere. I think that has definitely told us that, hey, be a tactical urbanism, and then making sure that you account for these types of street level activities, because there's a need for, we got to be more pedestrian friendly in our projects, and that is by far a top priority. Yes.
Yeah, and I used to live in Virginia Highland, and I would work to my office at Ponce City Market daily. And once I got to the Beltline, you saw a bunch of people commuting, but on the main surface roadways in Virginia Highland and Ponce Highland and everything, you didn't see people really commuting to work by mode of walking. But the Beltline absolutely interconnects different parts of the city. There are people who will walk or bike it 5 miles or more to get from point A to point B, not just for exercise. And I think that's one of the great things the Atlanta downtown and city area has.
That's a great example, Robert. The Beltline, that's a jewel of the Atlanta region. I would say it's a great way to connect neighborhoods. It's a great way to connect communities, quite frankly. And so that is by far one of our big projects in the Atlanta region as far as transit opportunities, but also reconnecting communities and making sure that there's easy ways to go from one to the other. And yeah, by far the Beltline is top on our list.
Yeah, and that whole range of micro transit all the way up to MARTA, whether it's MARTA Rail, MARTA Bus, having all of those different elements work together to provide what I'd like to consider a complete, comprehensive transportation network. We can't build rail everywhere, but that first mile, last mile is absolutely where we can go to help get closer to that neutral carbon footprint.
Yes, first mile, last mile connectivities are definitely very important. And micro transit, yes, that is also the way of the future. And we found that out. So I'm going to backtrack for a minute here. When I talk about I talked earlier about household travel surveys. The common denominator across any and all household travel surveys anywhere in the US or definitely in the Atlanta region is we never get enough transit riders, right? So what we do, we have a separate effort called a Regional Origin Destination Transit on Board Survey, where we use tablet PC technology and we meet transit riders at the platform, at the bus stop, and we ask, basically similar question that we asked in the household travel survey: where are you going from, where are you going, that sort of thing. So with that type of survey, a transit on board survey, it allows us to complement the household travel survey as well as the big data. We had considered leveraging big data as a surrogate or substitute to transit on board survey, and I think that's heading in that direction. That the future is definitely heading in that direction. But we did ours in 2019. As a matter of fact, we got out of the field in December 2019 with our last transit on board surveys. And sure enough, that was just a couple months prior to the pandemic. So to this day, this remains the last pre-pandemic transit on board survey in the nation, as far as I can tell, that I've been told. But there is definitely a need for these types of surveys. And, again, we try to do some data fusion with big data sets just to verify certain OD patterns and that sort of things. But yeah, clearly micro transit and then first mile, last mile connectivities are very important.
Excellent. As always, Guy, this has been a wonderful discussion. Right now, I'd like to move into opening up to Q&A. If any anybody on the line has any questions they'd like to ask, or Guy, if you do as well, let's get them out there.
Yeah. So Well, while we're waiting on questions coming from, I just want to say a few additional words or comments on regarding electrification. So, and I'm going to talk for a minute about the evolution of the concept of autonomous vehicle. So it started autonomous vehicles, so AVs. Then we started talking about CAVs, connected autonomous vehicles. But now the new concept is the acronym, whether it's CASE or ACES, so ACES. So it's autonomous, it's connected, it's electric, and it's shared. So this is the type of new vehicle concept we need to do a better job at accounting for it with our trial demand model. So I just wanted to make sure that this was mentioned as well, because the electrification of the fleet, the electrification of the system, that is definitely something in the works. And then the shared concept. So it's no longer auto ownership. Will that go away? Time will tell. Personal preferences will prevail one way or another. But definitely, whether it's a shared, electric, connected, and autonomous, that's another concept of the future, but it's already in the works.
I'm glad you brought that up, because exactly, it's a very important element that will help continue that transportation network, and that shared economy is going to really help out, where I don't need to own a car. It might be an autonomous vehicle that connects me and you and other people that we don't know along the way. And it would be much more sustainable to look at it that way.
But that's a great point. The concept of the shared economy, like you said, and we've saw tremendous progress with Uber, Lyft, and TNCs, and that's, again, by far the way to go. Over time, it could be that a TNC fleet managed by Uber or Lyft would be an actual fleet of autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles. So time will tell, but that's the way of the future.
Absolutely. And our first question is, do you see big data better suited for transit planning, or rather for transit optimization?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I would say I would start with transit planning for sure. If we get a better sense for origin destinations of transit riders as part of, say, a transit onboard survey or complement supplement or hybrid approach, and then eventually optimize those transit schedules. Make sure that the buses are running on time, they're heavy rail as well, and it goes where there's a need for people to ride, so where they live, but also where they work. And so make those connections. And again, with this is this concept of first mile, last mile connectivity. So yes, I would say big data can help transit agencies to optimize transit schedules and that sort of things. But I would start with the planning. Clearly, it will assist us to do a better job with planning as well.
Absolutely. Next question, and I probably should have highlighted this a little earlier. We're going with, so with your years of experience in transportation, was there ever a challenging project while planning transit models?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. So I will say that in the Atlanta region, we've made extra efforts to reach out to the what we call the hard to reach populations and the underserved population via focus groups and others, because we want to make sure that we listen to that population that appears to be at times underserved, whether it's by transit or roads. So that is clearly a challenge. And with this greater emphasis placed upon equity, this is even more so important for us to make sure we account for all socioeconomic groups, minorities, and everything, to be more inclusive. Make sure we include, it's not only for the zero car house, although there are different types of zero car households, as we find out in our surveys. Some that are doing it on purpose, they make a choice, a definite choice. We're not going to own a car, we're just going to ride transit. That's a choice rider, but you have captive riders within a transportation system, especially for transit. And their only ways to get from home to their workplace is via transit. And oh, by the way, they may not be white collars. They don't have the option to work from home. They have to get to their service jobs. And so we got to be very, very mindful and considerate of those. So that's definitely a challenge that I think is common across all metro areas.
Absolutely. And we have one final question. Who controls the private-public relationships for urban development projects within the Atlanta region?
Right. So a great question. I would say that this is I'm not sure about the word control per se, but those are initiatives,
Yeah.
public-private partnerships types of initiatives that we've seen. We've seen those with some of our express toll lanes and the toll lanes concepts, and then yeah. But I think there's more of a need or a future for these types of ventures or public-private partnerships and collaborations between private sector and public sector to make things happen, whether it's a roadway improvement, an express toll lane, or even the transit investment, a TOD, for instance, with transit-oriented developments, perfect opportunities for a private sector. And we've seen some examples in the Atlantic region with State Farm and other ones, I believe, some of our TOD projects. So yes, great question. And again, that's something to keep working on.
Excellent. Guy, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today on our very first Brewing Data session. Your time, your experience is not just enjoyed by me, but everybody watching in today as well as in the future. So, one final question popped in real quick, if you have another minute.
Yes.
So how can we be more efficient and sustainable with mass transportation looking into microtransit?
Right. So we need to go where there's a need. So basically, it's one thing to run bus lines all over to literally cover the region. We got bus lines going everywhere. That's one thing. But we got to be more mindful. Where do people live and where do they go to work? Where is the need? And so, and then microtransit in this case for first mile, last mile connectivity is probably the best solution, because it's one thing to get somebody from point A to point B, but clearly there's what we call it in travel terminal time. So how you get from, say, the train station to your workplace or to your home. So whether it's via a bus line, but I think that there's a need for microtransit, what I call on-demand microtransit solutions, and shared, obviously. So with perhaps smaller vehicles, and because sometimes we run bus lines and they're half empty. I'll tell you, especially in the case of the suburban and exurban express bus service, because I ride one in the Atlantic region, and it's amazing now since the pandemic. Those buses they're clearly fulfilling a need, but they're not full like they used to be. But again, that's anecdotal evidence. But yes, microtransit and on-demand transit and shared systems. Yes.
Excellent. Very, very good discourse today, Guy. I'd like to remind everybody to tune in next Friday, where we have Sharmila Mukherjee coming to join us. Sharmila is an experienced leader with expertise in progressive urban transportation planning, project and program management, and a successful track record for stakeholder relations. She is now the Executive Vice President in Planning and Development for Cap Metro in Austin, Texas, and responsible for shaping, defining, and advancing short and long-term transit programs. And she plays a key role in the creation of partnerships to guide transit solutions in Austin and the surrounding area. Guy, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to give your audience today?
No, I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity. And again, I want to remind everybody that this is a data-driven world, obviously, whether it's for travel and modeling or, as we saw with COVID, the pandemic. And then there is clearly a need for big data providers, big data aggregators. So that's where the future is.
Great. Well, thank you all. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.